and I've always been an animal lover, I guess, like everybody says. My first dog was when I was living in Japan, just a little puppy dog. I think she was a stray. And I remember how heartbroken I was when my mother and I got on a train to go somewhere, and she followed us to the train station. When we came back, she was gone. I mean, we had someone um, living at the house who was supposed to be watching the dog. And I still remember this day. I was probably 3 or 4 at the time. I was heartbroken. My next dog was when I was in the United States, and I was walking home from school when this little dog came up to me and followed me home. And we adopted her, and I named her Hobo. So this is just connecting with animals. I used to literally, one of my favorite scenes in childhood fairy tales was Snow White out in the woods with her arms outstretched, surrounded by animals, and all the birds on her. So that's kind of like I would like daydream about connecting with being friends with all of the woodland creatures. Like literally, that would be one of my favorite daydreams. I would just close my eyes, be riding in a car, I'd see a deer, I'd shut my eyes, and I would daydream that I was Snow White, communing with all of the woodland creatures and things. So I think that's just something that I've always had, and I feel so lucky that I'm actually able to communicate or commune with other species, having the animal sanctuary. But I became a vegetarian when I was 12 years old. It happened overnight. I went on a school camping trip. I was put in a vegetarian group. 3 days later, I came home. My mother put pork chops in front of me, and I saw a pig. I made that connection. I pushed the pork chops away, and I never looked back. Never ate meat after that.
Wow.
I thought probably a week from then I would crave it again, but I never did. I mean, it was overnight. It just ceased to be food. It was like all of a sudden it went from being food to, this desk. Why would I eat this desk? It's not food. But my perception changed just like that. And I think that's what we need to do with people is we have to change people's perceptions about animals, not as commodities or as food, but as other living beings. Like nobody looks at a dog and thinks, in the United States anyway, no one looks at a dog and thinks they want to eat the dog. We have to do that with all the other animals. And we also can't be judgmental about other cultures that might eat a species that we don't eat, because there's racism hidden in there. But basically, we need to move all of humanity to recognize animals as sentient beings that have their own lives, that have their own right to having their own lives, and just not being viewed as food. We can't restrain people from eating meat. We have to actually change their hearts and their minds and their perception. Just like I had that momentary light bulb that went off, my perception of animals just changed overnight. I just never saw them as food again. I made that connection, and we have to change that, because that's how we evolve as a species ourselves.
Was your family supportive of you, or did you run into kind of resistance when you were that age?
No, my mother, they were not supportive of me. They were horrified. So, my story is I came from Japan when I was almost 7. And in Japan, we didn't eat a lot of meat because it was, post World War II. Japan was not a wealthy country yet. Meat was not really a part of the Japanese diet for the most part. Meat was a special occasion thing. We predominantly ate things like, we ate rice, we ate noodles, we ate vegetables, we ate natto, which is fermented soybeans. We ate tofu, we had a little fish, but, we weren't eating tons of meat on a regular basis. We ate meat a few times a month. That was about it. I moved to the United States. My father was American. He wanted to make sure that I, got the nutrients I needed. And all of a sudden I started eating tons and tons of meat. It seemed like meat was, that they felt that was the way to show love to me, was to give me the best food possible. And that was eating meat.
Okay.
And I can understand that. So when I stopped eating meat, my mother was horrified, and she cooked for me for a couple of months, and then she threw up her arms and said, "You're on your own."
Oh, wow.
I'm not cooking for you anymore. And so I was forced to learn how to cook. And what this was actually a ploy to get me to start eating meat again, because she figured I wouldn't ever cook for myself. I look back on my life, and Japanese girls are typically raised to be very demure and obedient, and I was not. And the question is why? Like, what was in me that I was so defiant? Because I remember another girl at school who wanted to be a vegetarian. This is probably 8th grade or so. And she says, well, I really want to be vegetarian like you, but my parents won't let me. And I said, why is that stopping you? Like, what's the big deal? If you don't want to eat meat, you just stop eating meat. Like, and I realized, I remember having that conversation with her and just like not understanding her. So I think there was just like this really defiant, independent streak in me from the time. I don't know why I ended up that way, but I did. So my mother, her tactic didn't work. I just learned to cook. That was it. And I became a better and better cook. And,
But when the shootings happened in Georgia, and just with the pandemic, there's been such a wave of ignorance and hate and discrimination against Asian American people. What kind of stereotypes or challenges have you faced?
I didn't talk about it for years. And I've had evolving emotions about it for much of my life. But when I immigrated to the United States in 1964, the parents of the kids I went to school with, most of them, many of the fathers have been in World War II. And so I would walk down the street and people would say things like, you bombed Pearl Harbor. And I remember having to go home and say, what's Pearl Harbor? Because I was 7 years old. I didn't know what actually, and I didn't speak English when I came to the United States either initially. So, all the Asians were lumped into one category. So it was Ching Chong Chinaman and just every other stereotypical thing you could think of. If people laughing at my lunchbox, which had onigiri and rice balls and things like that in it. My mother didn't know how to make sandwiches initially, for example, so I would be sent to school with Japanese food, and people would make fun of my lunchbox. And I remember my mother had a learning curve trying to learn how to make. She had to learn how to make American food. She learned from a neighbor. And my lunches started changing. So I was definitely subject to that. I think I was in denial for a long time. I think maybe one of the reasons I ended up becoming strong and defiant was because I moved to a lily white community when I was, not quite 7. And I was put into I was first grade. My age group was first grade. So I went into first grade. And I didn't speak any English, so they put me back into kindergarten. And I remember that being a huge point of shame for me. And I was just overcome with shame that I was, in a lower age group. I'd already gone through kindergarten in Japan, and why was I in kindergarten again? And I did skip a grade later, so I made up for it. Okay. And then I graduated high school a year early. So, I more than made up for it in the end. But in the very beginning, being called every name, not having friends, just things like people coming up to me and coming up and touching my hair and saying, remember this one girl touched my hair and she goes, ooh, it feels like horsehair. I don't know, maybe I grew tough because of that. What I remember is in high school, a friend of mine, and this is back in the 70s, and we were all, kind of anti-war activists and kind of hippy-dippy and, going to peace marches and stuff like that. But anyway, this friend of mine said, how do you feel being a third world person? So this is when third world person was like, you don't say that anymore.
Yeah.
But that was, and I was like shocked. Like I didn't even know what to make of that. And I was in denial. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I've grown up, I've spent, I don't know, 10 of my 16 years in the United States, and I'm not a third world person. And I was in denial.
Okay.
About that. And it was really only, after college, I went back to Japan, lived there for a number of years because I really felt like I needed to get back to my roots and really understand who am I? Like what happened to me in those first few years? And it was really only when I came back from living in Japan for 9 years or so that I realized, I became fully proud of being Japanese, being a Japanese American, and really owning my Japanese heritage rather than being ashamed of it. I mean,
Sure.
I refused to speak Japanese with my mother after a while. I was embarrassed by my mother. We would go to the store and her English wasn't very good. So, here I am, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and we're at a department store. She goes, "Can you ask the lady where the bathroom is?"
Mm.
And this little kid is going up to the department store clerk and saying, "Where's the bathroom?" for my mom. And I got so upset with her eventually that I refused to speak Japanese. And I would say to her, "Speak English, don't speak Japanese to me." So, I completely rebelled about being Japanese. All I wanted was to wake up one day. I'll tell you this funny story. My first experience with cheese.
Okay.
So I was probably about 8 years old. I don't know if you've heard this story because I think I've shared this podcast before. But I was invited to somebody's house or a party or something, a get together, and I heard we were going to have pizza. And now pizza's everywhere now, but back in the 1960s, it wasn't everywhere. And pizza was something that you had once in a while. You didn't have it all the time. So, but I knew it was famous. I knew the kids loved pizza, and I never had it before. And I didn't really eat cheese. And so this was like, oh my God, I'm going to have pizza. I'm going to be an American. Yay. Maybe my hair will turn blonde. That's what I was thinking. So I went there and I was so excited. And I took that bite of pizza and I literally about choked. I thought it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever had. And because the Japanese food's really light. There's not a lot of oil. There's not a lot of grease. And it's fresh and clean. And instead there's this cloying, half rancid, oily stuff like coming down, it was just like dripping with oil. And I had to pretend that I liked it. I barely got through my piece. I thought it was so gross. And then I worked really, really hard to like cheese. And then I became a total cheese fanatic.
Wow.
It was like all I ever wanted to do. Like I remember somehow I got this blonde wig. Maybe it was for Halloween. And like I would just go into the bathroom and I put the wig on and I'd like, what if I could just look like all the, the white girls? And I was enamored with this with white beauty. It was just, I was so ashamed of being Japanese, of being Asian. So, I carried that within me for a long time. This recent, spate of anti-Asian violence and hate, obviously triggered by the former president, had a lot to do with it. It's shameful. It's all shameful. And any kind of ism, racism, sexism, speciesism, it's all really a scourge to humanity. And we need to evolve. And, we need to create a culture that's based on compassion and love. Those are the only things that matter. Nothing else matters. Love and compassion. And those are the only things. If we operate every single day from a place of love and compassion, we can't survive as a species without that. We can't survive as individuals without compassion and love. We need each other.
Yeah.
We all need each other. And you can't create a culture based on hate. It won't survive. It only tears you apart. It only tears the fabric of society and culture and humanity apart. Yeah, I've experienced it, but you know what? I've never dwelled on it. I'll tell you why, because there was so much more suffering beyond what I went through. And I just felt like I've just never, ever had a victim mentality. I've never been one to say, why are they doing this to me? Because there's so much suffering around me that I can either be a victim or I can do something to alleviate suffering of others. And I think that's how I've always operated. It's like, if I'm suffering, there's someone else who's suffering a lot more. I mean, yeah. So I had a few, incidences of racism throughout my period in America. And there's a lot more. I can tell you things. Most of the time, I laugh about them because they're just it says more about the person than it does about me. And I'm not sure that we can be effective emancipators of ourselves or others if we're so caught up in being a victim.
Right.
So we have to rise above our own victimization and figure out, how am I going to lift everybody up?
Clearly, like, this compassion angle is it seems very core to who you are and the message that you're putting out in the world. So can you tell me about the tattoo and everything that goes behind, like, your decision to go from meat eater to vegetarian and then making the jump to vegan?
Yeah. So, being vegan was a long journey for me, to be honest. It was in the mid 1980s when I think I saw an article in Vegetarian Times magazine. I was living in Japan. I had a subscription to Vegetarian Times that probably took 2 months to get to me. But I think that was the first time I ever read anything about the dairy industry, and I didn't know anything about it because, I grew up in California with, Clover talking about the happy cows and the whole happy cow myth. And you see the cows grazing in the grass and you think everything's hunky-dory and they're happy, and you have to, they have to be milked, and there are just these magical milk machines, and you never question how actually do they give milk. I mean, like, why is it how come there's no babies around? Like, you just never think about any of that. I had gotten to a point living in Japan. First, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and then I was living on my own. But when I first moved to Japan as a vegetarian, it's very hard to find anything to eat. Everything had fish broth in it. I kid you not. It's virtually impossible to eat because there's fish broth in everything. And the only way I could eat vegetarian was if I ate at a Western restaurant and had something like spaghetti or pizza. And there were not very many vegetarian or Western style restaurants at the time. I was living with my aunt and uncle, and my uncle got really pissed at me. He said, "You're so selfish. Your aunt is cooking all these separate meals. She's going all over Tokyo trying to find dairy products for you to eat, for your protein." Because I felt like I thought I needed to eat dairy products. And she has to cook a separate meal, and you just need to eat fish. And I got a lot of pressure. And so eventually I succumbed to that and I started eating fish. And I ate fish for a few years. And one day I read that article and I looked at myself and I said, why am I eating fish? I mean, in some ways, I don't want to say I'm glad, but having eaten fish again helped me expand my repertoire of, let's say, cooking ideas, and help me write my recent book and things like that. But I was like, who have I become? Why am I doing this? This isn't the ethics. It was easier to like disconnect with fish in the sea than it was with woodland creatures and cows and things like that. And so I decided I was going to go vegan. It was kind of an overnight decision, but it was a slower transition. Let's just say I was 99% vegan, and occasionally I used to say I was a cheating vegan, because occasionally I would I would go to someone's house and I would eat cheese, or I would break down in front of a cheese platter, or pizza or something like that. But it was just a few times a year, and eventually I just said, why am I doing this? And I just got rid of dairy altogether. But it was I don't have like a vegan anniversary, just like when I went vegetarian, because it just was, I gave up fish, but in terms of the cheese, it was, let's just say, it took a few years for me to get it out 100%. And the more I learned about the sustainability aspect, it really, that and the treatment of cows, of course, it was more and more encouraging for me to continue this journey. I think the real scare for the environment came out in, I think it was either 2006 or 2007. when the United Nations FAO report, Livestock's Long Shadow, came out. I think that was, when I read that, I was like, oh my God. Tattoo, the idea, phenomenally vegan was a phrase that our VP of brand, Jim Alsop, came up with. And I felt like it signified everything that I wanted, because we were getting pushback from the industry and from various people saying, why are we using the word vegan? We should be saying plant-based. It's a lot friendlier. It doesn't scare people away. The word vegan. So this was like a discussion that was all over the industry. It was even among activists. It was everywhere. All of a sudden people were saying, well, maybe we shouldn't use vegan. It's got a lot of baggage. We should say plant-based. And I thought this was bullshit. First of all, we don't even know what the word plant-based means. And studies show that there's more confusion about that term than the word vegan. And who cares if it has baggage? Language evolves. What's the intention behind the word vegan? Well, let's reset that intention. Let's repackage it and make it look beautiful. And so by saying phenomenally vegan, it could become not only aspirational, but inspirational. What I want to do with vegan is just make it such an exciting thing that everybody wants to be vegan. So like I've given talks about things like, being vegan veganism is like the world's biggest, most inclusive club, and membership is free and everybody can join. And oh my God, it's so much fun being vegan. You wouldn't believe it. And so when people come up to me and they say, oh, so you're vegan? I'm like, oh my God, you're not vegan? Oh, you don't know what you're missing. It's fear of missing. It's FOMO, fear of missing out. Like that's what we have to communicate to people. Like how great the vegan lifestyle is. I gave a talk one time on the happiness ratio of vegans, and vegans are happier. And that's what I want to show to the world is, look, this is your opportunity to elevate your own life, to become a happier human being, because no vegan goes up, you don't go vegan and then go, oh my God, it's the worst thing I ever did. I really, really regret it. People don't do that. People go vegan, and what happens? They're like, oh my God, why didn't I do this sooner? I want to tell the whole world about it. It's kind of like being a born again Christian. It's like, it's so fantastic. You want to share it with the world. And so I want to prove to the world how phenomenal it is to be vegan. And so I put that on, I did it on my 60th, right after my 60th birthday, my first tattoo, to show how vegan and how proud I am, how phenomenally vegan and how proud I am. And hey, and I still, got the arms to show for it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought it was amazing. And, when you bring up plant-based, I remember when they first rolled that out a couple years ago, I went to the store and I was like, can I eat this? Like,
you don't even know.
I didn't know. I'm like, do they feed the cows grass? Like, what is this? And I wanted to ask you about this battle that you've had for years now. You're very well known as a fierce advocate for being able to package your products in a way that is compassionate but shows what you're doing. You've been sued, you have sued, and just wanted you to talk about these, truth in labeling laws, and it seems like the animal ag industry is really starting to try to crack down on these plant-based initiatives that are becoming bigger competitors now to the traditional meat market.
I mean, what is it? They say first they laugh at you, then what is that expression? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And that's where we are. 30 years ago, when I had my first business in the United States, I was making vegan cakes at a little bakery. I couldn't get anyone they were like, why are you making these cakes without eggs and butter? What's the point? So I was ignorable. And then, veganism was laughable. People were like, haha, right? Vegan cheese, haha. And now we're at a point where we're big enough, we're making enough of an impression, especially in fluid milk, where alternative milks are 15% have 15% market share in the fluid milk category. Vegan cheese is way behind, but it's catching up. It's going to get to that point. We're now becoming a threat. And There's relationships that go back with governments, state and federal, for a very, very long time. Part of the problem is the dairy industry has created their own problems. Consolidation in the dairy industry is what has really led to the decline of small stake uh, farmers, of small farmers. And since the 1970s, dairy consumption has been on a precipitous decline all around, largely because of the consolidation. And many farmers are, I can't remember what the statistics are, but we're losing thousands of small dairy farms every single year. And there was a story in the New York Times last year or so about the high rate of suicide among New York dairy farmers. It's happening all over the country, less so in California than in many other places in the country, but it's happening here as well too, where there's bankruptcies. There's, we talked to one dairy farmer last year that was going to have to file bankruptcy. And it's because of consolidation. There's another dairy farm out in Point Reyes National Seashore, which is a public park. This is a whole other thing that I'm fighting right now. But McClure Ranch, they sell to Clover, just announced they're going to shut down. He's the largest ranch out there. I think he has about 600 cows. They're shutting down. He says he can't get the prices that he got before. And with the drought, having to truck water in, he can't make ends meet. So he's shutting down. So dairy's not lucrative because of consolidation. He's not shutting down because little old Miyoko opened up a vegan cheese company in Petaluma and is threatening his business. He's shutting down because of consolidation. And he doesn't determine what prices he sets. I mean, when I was growing up in California, when I was a kid, there was a milkman who delivered bottles of milk and put it on your doorstep. It was the local farm, and they milked their own cows, and they delivered the milk to your doorstep. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. These big tankers come and they pick up milk from the farmers, and they take it to the consolidators like Clover or Horizon, and they set the prices. The milk, the small farmer doesn't. Clover says, I'm going to pay you this, etc. That's how it works. So they're getting conventional prices for organic milk. It doesn't make any sense anymore. They can't make their overhead. So it isn't the plant-based companies that's threatening them. It's this corporate big ag consolidation that's impacting them. The average farmer gets, I believe, 42% of their income from government subsidies, not even from actually selling their milk. I mean, it's just a really, really wacky system. And the whole thing needs to be reset. And that's what we're playing a part in. We're trying to form a relationship with a California dairy farmer and help them transition to crops, which is a transition that we're going to fund. I have a full-time person working in that field, the farm transition manager, and her sole role at Miyoko's, it's a non-revenue producing role. Her whole role is to find a farmer and help them transition, and she's making a lot of headway. It's a new role. I created it about a month ago. So she's maybe 6 weeks ago, but she's doing a phenomenal job hooking up with various organizations. And, I think we're getting closer and closer to finding an actual farm. McClure's going to go down. He's closing down his farm. And there was this sad luck story in the local papers about, oh my gosh, he's got 30 Hispanic workers that are not going to be out of work. And what are they going to do? Well, we're going to go and offer them jobs. So we're not going to be the threat. We're going to be the solution.
That's amazing.
And we're going to bring the dairy industry along. All you have to do is transition. If you see the billboard that we have in Times Square, from dairy milk to plant milk. And milk is milk, whether you make it from cows or from plants. And we're going to show that the future is made from plant milk and that cows are for hugging. So, when we say milk plants hug cows, we want to change the perception of animals as living beings that are deserving of our love and our stewardship. We created them. And another thing that I find problematic in a lot of the language from activists and some of the other so-called plant-based companies is we're now villainizing cows. We talk about cows as being methane producers as if they're evil. They're only evil because we created so many hundreds of millions of them all over the world. That's an artificial system. Left to their own devices, they wouldn't be problematic at all. But we've created this system of animal agriculture and created 100 million cows in the United States, and no wonder they're one of the leading sources of climate change. But that's not their fault. That's our fault. That's man's fault.
And, I think that's a good tie-in. You brought up Point Reyes, and we've been following the Tool Elk situation too. Yeah. And I wanted you to speak to that because, there you have another example where, yes, you have these precious animals that are being killed for these grazing allotments, but it's not the cow's fault that they're there. And, when you talk too about just the sustainability aspect of our meat culture, our dairy culture, it seems like to me it all ties in.
What is really poignant about this particular issue is that Tule elk are a native species in California, and there are only 5,000 left. They were actually hunted to near extinction in the 1800s, and then they were brought back to life. I think they found a couple of Tule elk left, and they mated them, and now we have about 5,000 Tule elk left in California. That's the entire world's population of Tule elk. Of the 5,000 or so, the largest herd can be found in Point Reyes National Seashore. And unfortunately, there were about 450 of them in a certain part of Point Reyes National Seashore, a certain herd that had a smaller area to graze because they had built fencing to protect the cows on ranch land. So I guess what I should say is Point Reyes National Seashore started about 60 years ago when the federal government bought several thousand acres from, I think, 21 ranching families. And they were paid millions of dollars for this land. And then they were leased the land. So they were paid, and then they were allowed to remain on the land for a number of years at a very low market rate. So they were leasing their land back from Point Reyes National Seashore. Point Reyes National Seashore was actually created as a getaway, or as a way to connect actually lower income communities in the Bay Area to nature. And that's what it was there for. And eventually, this initial lease, and I apologize, can't remember how long that initial lease for the ranchers was supposed to be. I think it could have been 20 years, was that they were supposed to leave by then. Mm. And then it's been renewed a couple of times, I believe. I might have that fact wrong about the actual length of the lease, but they were initially leased back the land, and they were supposed to transition off the land. And then it was supposed to be, the entire area was supposed to be wilded and revert to natural habitat. That didn't happen, and now it's been 60 years and the lease expired last year. And so the question was, do we renew the leases again, or do we rewild it? And the Park Service had 5 or 6 proposals, and unfortunately, the one that allows the ranches to remain, and not only that, but to diversify with even more animals and crops, won despite public support for ranching to end. Something like 95% of the comments that came in during the public commenting period were in support of getting rid of the ranches and letting the Tule elk roam the entire area, and just rewilding the entire park and opening it up to the people for whom it was, well, the taxpayers that are paying for it. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. But here's what happened with the Tule elk, the 450 Tule elk that were caught behind the ranch fence lines. In the last 6 months, over a third of that herd has passed away because they had no access to water or forage. In addition, the proposal B that won will allow for culling of herds. So we can keep the number of Tule elk in check because the ranchers are complaining they're taking the forage. Now, grant that an average cow needs to eat something like 40 pounds of forage or hay a day. A Tule elk needs 9 pounds. So it's considerably different. There's 5,000 cows on Point Reyes National Seashore, and I believe there's something like 900 Tule elk in Point Reyes National Seashore. So there's no contest whatsoever. Also should mention that the waters off of Point Reyes are among the 10 dirtiest in California. So there's so much E. coli contamination. It's not, you're not even encouraged to swim there. So it's pretty disgusting. But the fact is, this is representative of what happens across the country. Most people don't realize, everyone says they're lovers of wildlife. What they don't realize is if you love wildlife, you can't have your steak, or especially your steak, but not even your chicken or your pork. Because here's what happens. We actually have an agency called U.S. Wildlife Services, and they actually have one purpose, and that is primarily to exterminate or control wildlife that competes with or threatens animal agriculture. So every single year we kill approximately something like 100 million animals. Everything from the predators like bobcats and coyotes and mountain lions to species that supposedly compete with grazing, such as mustangs, burros, deer, elk, bears, and also little animals you wouldn't even think of, different kinds of birds and raccoons and all kinds of species. So we pay lots and lots of taxpayer dollars to get rid of wildlife. And that's so you can have your free range beef. So I ask people, think about that. Next time you say, I love wildlife, I ask, how much do you love wildlife? Do you love wildlife enough to give up steak?
The more I learn it, the more it is so interconnected. And when you can talk to people in the ways that, with things that resonate with them, it's like that is when I start seeing people change too. So, and I do want to be mindful of your time because I know you have a ranch and you have other things in a business. But I did want you to speak a little bit about your ranch that you have. Where did that idea come from? It sounds like, your partner was on board with that and now you have a bunch of animals. Just,
Sure.
Tell me about that.
So a number of years ago, I was giving a talk somewhere in Texas, and I went to a vegan food truck, and behind the food truck, there were two little piggies. I guess they're just rescue piggies. And I thought they were so cute. And I came home and I said to my husband, one of these days when we retire, I'd love to go out, love to buy some land and rescue some farm animals. And then next thing you know, he goes, oh, he's on the internet. He goes, there's a place, 15 minutes away. It's got 17 acres and a barn. Why don't we go look at it? And next thing you knew, literally, we had moved there. But, we weren't planning to rescue any animals at the time. We just thought, this was a great opportunity, had land, and we could have a little garden and all of that stuff. So we were living there. And then next thing you knew, Animal Place, which is a sanctuary in Grass Valley, California, called and said, oh, we have these two goats that we found, strays, and can you take them? And so Rufus and Reggie, these two little goats, came to live with me, or would live with us. And at the time, we really didn't have any fencing or infrastructure. So we built a little corral for them. And the next thing you knew, someone called and said, this man died. He left 3 little pot-bellied pigs. Can you take them? So they came. And then Farm Sanctuary called. And then somebody else called. And finally, we said, we're just going to start a sanctuary. And we formed a 501c3 nonprofit. And we called it Rancho Compasion. So Compassion Ranch. Today we have about 120 animals. We have a very small staff and a lot of volunteers, and we have visitation, work days, humane education. We're the closest sanctuary to San Francisco and the East Bay, to Berkeley. So, from San Francisco or points in the East Bay, you can get to us in about 45 minutes. So it's really a place you can come and not only connect with animals, but learn about animals. We've done some outreach to schools. We're hoping to get that up and running more now that COVID restrictions are lifting. But we have all kinds of animals, everything from chickens to turkeys to ducks and geese to cows and every species in between. And I feel so fortunate because I formed such, I don't know, friendships with all of them. And I've learned about how they can be just like us. Some of them are compassionate and sensitive, and others are jokesters, and others are goofy, and others are aloof, and others are feeling pain, and you can tell when they're sad. Gosh, they have a range of emotions just like human beings. And we just need to get wise enough to learn to listen.